I will start recording this. Great, no worries. Thanks for turning up, folks. Let's see. Let me open up here. Okay, not many folks. 14 folks. Great. That's fine. And that should make things easier, right? Okay, so let me just share my screen first of all, and then what I'll do is I'll explain, how we'll do this, the session basically. Application screen, here we go. Okay. So what I intend to do with this basically is just give you a little bit of background of, stuff I've already said before, but just to sort of confirm about how the exam's going to work. And then, so I'll talk for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes or something. And then what we can do is, so I think the easiest way to do this is if you have specific questions and things that you are sort of confused by, right? What we can do is we can go through in order of the lectures that we've gone through that are part of the exam for my own sanity, so I can follow along. And if you could phrase your questions around, in this lecture, particularly on slide number so-and-so or something like that, you can phrase your questions around like that, and we can pull up the slides and we can bring the relevant information, etc., and discuss it. Okay, hi folks. Hi. So that's the general sort of approach of what I want to do, and this can be 10 minutes or it could be an hour or however long it needs to be, etc. Okay, so whatever sort of suits you guys. So what do we got here? So just a quick reminder from information that was on the syllabus, right? So, the lecture section is overall worth 60% of your grades. We've done midterm 1, we've done midterm 2. This is what we're focusing on here, okay? This final that is worth 15%. Your Achieves assignments and iClickers, I will probably compile those over the weekend. Overall, there'll be 15%. We'll drop the worst of your Achieve assignment and the worst 3 of your iClickers. The iClickers in total, I'm still going to finalize, and we'll look at how many questions and things like that there were, but it'll be around about, 2 Achieve assignments equivalent or something like that, okay? And I know that iClicker is not syncing with Achieve. Some people still, email me about that. I can't get them to sync, but if you look in your Reef app, that's what I see. And so, I can get those scores even if they're not synced with Achieve, okay? So the labs, most of you are done with that. There's still some Monday folks to finish the lab practical, but otherwise that component's out of the way. Okay, so that's where we are in the grand scheme of things. Almost there, okay? Okay, now as I mentioned the other day, and some people have emailed me of, what can you clarify what will be in the final exam? So I just want to reiterate what I said the other day. For last class question I answered, but it says no with no, which lowered my grade. So you're talking about the Pavina, yes, I saw your email. I will check on that because I know that there was an issue with that. But, there'll be 3 that's dropped anyway. And, so it said no response, it answered. Okay. I'll email folks back if they have issues with that. Okay, so just to reiterate what I said at the end of the last exam, okay, these are the PowerPoints that contain the topics that will be in the final exam, okay? So within the lecture slide, where you ordinarily go on Blackboard, under that lecture slides folder, I've arranged it so that all of the final exam topics are in the top level of the folder. All the stuff that we've done before, because it's a non-cumulative exam, all the previous lectures that are not part of the final exam have been put in this subfolder called Not in Final Exam, okay? I've also put some final exam revision notes in there that clarify, and these are sort of general notes, right? Just sort of bullet points that I pulled together of, you know, these are the sort of general topics, okay? The ultimate, you know, thing, obviously not everything can go in just that short file, but you know, these PowerPoints, what comes in these PowerPoints contains the topics that will be in the exam, okay? So these are the chapters that will be in the cover of the final exam. I've arranged them in lecture slides, okay. Also, just to reiterate on the syllabus, it said that we were going to do chapter 57, which is on a changing biosphere. We did not cover that in the final, to clarify on that. Also, on Tuesday, when we got to chapter 56, we missed, we didn't go through the final, like 4 or 5 slides or something. So nitrogen cycle and ecosystem services will not be in the final exam because we didn't go through those in the thing, okay? And not chapter 42 also. What was chapter 42? I'm just trying to see where 42 is. Was that the development chapter? I think, okay, the bit of I've only got the new syllabus up here that has dropped that chapter 2, but if that is the development chapter, then we are not doing that one, okay? And that's something that you do in 105 anyway, so there seemed little point in redoing it. Anyway, that's the general sort of thing. So as I mentioned here are some general revision notes on the bullet points of the topics that we've covered. And also, in the summary slides of each PowerPoint, essentially, there as a sort of, okay, here's the topics that we went through, right? Or some general framing or outline of ideas. So in terms of your revision, so look at the PowerPoint slides, because that contains the topics that we went through, because, the chapters, even though we overran on most of the lectures, we still left out quite a lot of stuff that was in the chapters. So it'll cover the topics that are in the PowerPoint slides. Listen to the lectures, because sometimes there is information that I sort of mentioned that's not in the book, perhaps, or perhaps not in the slides, I'm not quite sure. And then, read the relevant sections. Hopefully you've done that already. The relevant sections within the textbook that relate to those topics that we covered within the PowerPoint slides, okay? So that's the sort of the information that's available to you, covered in the topics class. Okay, yeah. I'll discuss this a little bit more in a second, but the final exam will have 56 multiple choice questions. So it'll be the same format as what we had for midterm 2, okay? It'll be on Blackboard. It'll have the same number of questions, and the questions will be drawn, and so they're all multiple choice. They're drawn from a pool of questions that I will create. I haven't actually created the exam yet. I'm working on that at the moment. I'll come to the time allowance, okay? So yeah, so there's a pool of questions. There'll be an equal number of questions within that pool that relate to each of these PowerPoint slides, okay? Those then get drawn at random. So this means that if you, if you have to restart a test, you won't necessarily get the same questions that you got the first time. So there's randomness within this, right? But an equal chance of getting a question from each of those, okay? Okay, so regarding the time, what I did in the midterm is I gave you a 2-hour and 15-minute window. So I took a screenshot from this, partly for my own benefit, so I know I've got it correct. This is the time that's arranged by the college. So 5:20, which is a Thursday, 11 until 1 p.m. Okay, that's a 2-hour window. Now, last time I created a 2-hour 15-minute window, just because, when there are technical issues and things like that that mess up, it gives a little bit more time. And so what I'm going to do is even though there's this window, I'm going to keep it open for that 2 hours 15. That's, you know, more than enough time to complete it. I'll give you the exam details in a second, okay? Accommodation letters, but how about each section? Yep, I'll come to that, okay? I just want to reinforce accommodation letters. So if you have a letter from the Office of Special Services with some, you know, special accommodation or something, then you've sent those to me already. Actually, you're supposed to, you know, write to us before every single exam, etc. But what I'll do is I'll email each of those accommodation letters that I have. I'll email those people directly over the weekend. If you have not heard from me by the end of the weekend, email me directly because, well, possibly I've forgotten, but hopefully not. But also the other thing it means is that, you know, maybe you've got a new accommodation letter and I don't know about it yet or something like that, okay? If that is your condition, email it to me ASAP straight away, okay? Now, if there's any sicknesses, email in advance. Don't email like during the exam or after the exam that you didn't feel well or something like that, okay? You have to email in advance, and it has to be backed up by a doctor's note, okay? So you can't email halfway through the exam and say, oh, you know, I've got a bit of a headache and, you know, I don't feel good, etc. Okay, it needs to be something official, okay? Typical college policy. If you have any exam clashes, now I've heard from one person who's taking a math exam that has been scheduled at the same time, and I've emailed that person back to just check that, you know, first of all, I wanted to check that I would hope that when the college is scheduling things that they're avoiding those types of conflicts, but possibly that can't be always avoided, right? If it's just time that's been arranged outside of the college schedule by that lecturer, then, you know, we need to discuss with that lecturer and say you can't, you know, do it at that time. So I just want to make sure, first of all, that it is an official college slot that has been doing it, because you know, we shouldn't be booted out of an official exam slot by somebody else who's just doing some other makeup or something at a different time. If there is an official clash, then we'll have to work something out. Okay. The main thing with all of this stuff is, if there's a special condition, let me know. You know, don't email me 5 minutes before the exam, etc. You know, do these things in advance. Okay. Okay. So here is the related to some of these questions. Here is the instructions that will be at the front of the exam when you open it, or these will be very similar to this. The first thing I want to point out is that, you know, last time in the midterm, the exam session was set to automatically become available at whatever time it, you know, whatever it was, okay, the exact time when your time window began. But, you know, then my email exploded because, you know, 150 people out of 200 or something, 250 couldn't see it. And I'm guessing it's because Blackboard is like, you know, trying to upload it to all of these different people at the same time and making it available. And I think it took about 23 minutes, I think it was, before everybody was like, okay, I can see it. And you know, my email calmed down. So what I'm going to do this time, and hopefully, I don't know, we'll see, hopefully this will avoid that issue, is I'm going to load it about half an hour beforehand to give it time to sort of disperse through the Blackboard ether, okay? Now, do not open and start the exam before 11 o'clock, okay? I will be monitoring the exam access through my own Blackboard. And if I see people go into it, I will kick them straight out, okay? So don't try doing that. You will see these instructions, so you should know, okay? If you carry on trying to access it, I will probably start knocking marks off you, okay? So do not start the exam before 11 o'clock, okay? Even if it's visible to you before that time. Okay, So here's the list of instructions. So yeah, if you see it before 11, don't go into it. You may start the exam at 11 a.m. on Thursday, 5:20, and you will have a time window of 2 hours and 15 minutes, okay, from 11 until 1:15 p.m. Unless I've contacted you specially within accommodation, I can set individual accommodations within the exam. Finish the exam within the time window. That's just my advice, okay? I think the system, it typically lets you start, you know, like say that you've only got, it's 1:10, there's 5 minutes left in the time window. I think if you start that last test, you know, it normally lets people finish, you know, take the full 20 minutes or whatever to finish the test. But I don't advise it, okay? Just in case there's a mess up. Finish the test, finish all the exam within that 2 hour, 15-minute time window. There's plenty of time, or it should be plenty of time to get through it, okay? Because it's a total of 80-minute test time, and this is what, 120, you know, 135 minutes or something. So as last time, there will be 4 separate tests, and each one will have 14 multiple choice questions, so a total of 56 questions. So this is actually a bit more generous than what was in the original syllabus, which had 60 questions within 75 minutes, I think it was. Okay, so we have 135 minutes to complete the entire exam. Yes, 2 hours and 15 minutes. So, you know, you can, the reason for this is, A, in case there's technical issues. If you need to take a bathroom break between tests and stuff, you've got time to do that. Or if you have other sort of special, you know, issues going on, etc. Also, the reason for the 4 separate tests is if that you get a technical glitch and have to restart. The maximum you could have to retake would be, you know, 13 questions, not have to start an entire 80-minute test all over again at the beginning, which would be a bit heartbreaking, okay? So you may take breaks between tests. Each exam is worth, each question is worth 1 mark. So whatever the, you know, 1.78 or something % of the exam. 80 minutes if no bathroom breaks, and you just sit there and non-stop taking it, no technical problems. That is correct, yes, Ileana, except for the time it takes you to close down the one test and move on to the other. So yes, about 80 minutes, okay? So as before, and I know people don't like this, but once you move on from a question, I'm afraid there's no backtracking allowed, okay? So that's just to obviously stop people communicating between each other and going back to questions, etc. Once they've you know, already had a go at it. And once you submit a test, you can't go back in and reopen it and take it again, okay? So it's a one-time thing. So as you're probably aware from last time, you know, when you do submit a test, sometimes there's some extra not especially visible OK buttons you have to go through to progress through, so to the next window to get to the next test. So just make sure that, you know, that you click that and are not sitting there and waiting when it's asking you for something. You have to complete the tests in order, okay? Test 1 first, test 2 second, test 3, then test 4. Now, in terms of the topics that will be on each test, okay, I'm doing it in the same way as midterm 2. So 4 of the PowerPoints basically that we covered. So there's deuterostomes 1, deuterostomes 2, animal behavior, and the physical and environment and biogeography of life. They will be in test 1 and 2, okay, those 4 topics. A question from any 4 of those topics could be mixed between test 1 and test 2, but they'll be within test 1 and test 2. They won't be in test 3 and 4, okay? Test 3 and 4, they will cover the other topics. So populations, species interactions, communities, and ecosystems, okay? Again, any chapter may be in either test 3 or test 4. It'll be, you know, it could be mixed up. It could be mixed up, but they will be within those 2 tests. And as before, if you encounter a technical issue during the exam, I'll have a Blackboard Collaborate Ultra session open. So, you know, obviously that's no good if you've lost your internet. But if that's not the case, that's the quickest way to go in. You know, people last time what happened was, you know, you don't necessarily want to be there all the time because it's cutting your bandwidth. But if you're having an issue, you can pop in and speak to me. And we can figure something out. I can do a reset if you're having, you know, if that's a problem. So that's the quickest way of dealing with me. Otherwise, you know, I'll be available by email. So those 2 ways that we can deal with issues. Okay. Okay. So that's it. That's the information. What we can do first of all is, are there any questions about what I've just described about how the exam will work? And if there's not, or once we've dealt with those, then we can start going through, you know, the different lectures that we've done, and to see if there's any, you know, particular questions or, you know, specific questions that you have. Okay. You can either go in the chat, or you know, people can talk. Have I got my volume on? Yes. Or they can talk if they want. Okay. So, any questions on what we have so far? Okay, sounds like we're good. Okay, so how about if I close that down, and I'll post this PowerPoint on Blackboard afterwards, okay? Just so that you have these notes available to you, and I'll put a announcement on to let people, you know, everyone know that these are there, okay? Okay, other than that, I have a folder here that has each one of my, you know, the PowerPoints that we've gone through. If there are particular chapters or specific questions, you know, I'm happy to, as best I can remember, at least, you know, discuss those with you, right? Otherwise, we can do whatever, you know. If people are not interested in questions, we can move on. Where do you happen to have practice questions? Somebody, we've discussed that before. I'm not going to do practice questions, I'm afraid. Please. It's I need to focus on getting the exam together, and it actually takes a long time to formulate questions. He gave a review sheet, and I look back at achieve questions. Yeah. So the achieve questions are available, so that can help you. That's a good point, Pavina. So because I had some questions, I had initially set the achieve assignments so that they would, you know, once you had finished them, that they would disappear. But people asked about that. Okay. So they are still visible to you. So that's actually, that's a good point. So, you know, that's one way of doing it. Now, I will just say about those achieve assignments that when we set those, you know, it's a sort of set thing by achieve. And typically when we've done those, we've just sort of said, okay, there are 20 questions, there you go. They haven't necessarily been screened for what is inside our lectures, specific lecture topics. It's really just a mechanism of us trying to encourage you to look through the book, right? Because most people, or many people, don't necessarily read the chapters or something, but at least this is a way that, you know, hopefully makes you a little bit go and read different things. So just be mindful that when you look at those achieve assignments, just you know, be mindful that there might be some topics or questions in there that aren't necessarily in the actual lectures. Okay. Yeah, that's only the questions were achieved, not explained. Okay. On exam 1, the questions were from achieve, not from the lecture. Okay. Okay. So, but anyway, but it's a great point. So you do have a lot of things to go and, you know, remind yourselves on some of those topics. Also, when you look in the book, you know, it's actually very useful when you look in the book chapters. They have, you know, the key points under different sections, and they have some little questions that you can look at there. And also, they have quite a nice little sort of visual summary at the end of each of those chapters. So that's also useful information to use. Okay. Would you say the questions you're planning on writing for the exam are more based on the lectures or the readings of the chapters? More lecture based, but you know, when you read the chapters, you get more information in many cases because, but you know, it's more lecture based is the answer to that question. Okay, Adina. Because exam was tailored more to the chapters. Okay. Exam 2, you felt was more tailored to the lectures, or yeah? Okay, good. So it'll be more tailored to you know, more like lecture midterm 2, I guess, in that sense is what I'm hoping. So and you know, occasionally there are things that are mentioned in the lectures that aren't necessarily in the book. Okay. So that's my goal. That's what I'm you know, trying to do basically to the best of my ability. Okay. Okay. Any particular lectures that people want me to pull up and explain any particular issues that or things you don't understand? Pavina, so I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You have your hand up.
Yes. For the chapter 31.
31. Okay.
Yeah. On the chordates vertebrate on the phylogeny tree, I don't see tunicates and lanceolets. Why is that?
What slide are you looking at?
On the summary, like on the vertebrate part, there's no tunicates and lanceolets.
Here, summary, lanceolets, tunicates.
Oh, I thought they're within the vertebrates.
No, so yeah, so these are chordates. These are the chordates, right? But these are distinct from the vertebrates. So these red dots here are the synapomorphies that sort of distinguish this clade beyond here. So these have a vertebral column, an anterior skull, a large brain, and a ventral heart that is distinctive from, you know, the groups that come before it, basically. But they do all have a notochord, okay? That's that, you know, stiffened rod. It's not the vertebral column, it's that stiffened rod that occurs along the dorsal side of the animal that allows it to flex. And they have a dorsal hollow nerve cord and a postanal tail. So those are the 3 key features that are distinguishing all of these, but they're distinct from the vertebrates that have this vertebral column and these other features. Okay? That make sense?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. I see there's a couple of other questions. I go to Ileana next.
Hi, Professor. Do you hear me?
Yes.
So my question is similar to Nathan's question about indeterminate cleavage.
Indeterminate cleavage, okay.
Yeah.
And that came up in, did that come up in the very first Deuterosome
yes,
lecture?
Slide 4.
Right. And that's related to here.
So I have a question for you. You were saying that if you separate those 4 cells, they can create like 4 different individuals.
Right.
So is that true for humans?
Is that true? What?
For humans? Like, can humans can we like separate those cells and they will create 4 different humans or dogs or?
I guess so. I guess so. Yeah. So this means that, you know, in these ones here, in the protostomes, their fate of the individual cells is fixed at a much earlier stage, right? So you can't do that. But here, you know, the fixing of the fate of those cells occurs at a later stage. So yes, you can separate these at a 4-cell stage in general. So remember, a lot of these things are general features, and often there are exceptions to this. Actually, this radial cleavage pattern is modified in a lot of ways in many deuterostomes. That's something that is talked about actually in that development, animal development chapter that we didn't do. It becomes heavily modified. But the general feature about this is that, yes, its indeterminate is fixed at a later stage. I don't know exactly what the human condition on this is, but that's where you're getting identical twins, right? Some splitting of these where you have, in the case of identical twins.
Interesting, thank you.
Okay, indeterminate clear. Okay, so Nathan, does that clarify you as well?
Yeah, I guess I have a follow-up question then. So does indeterminate cleavage just mean that when cleavage occurs early on, none of the cells are fated yet, so they can become anything? Like
exactly.
Okay.
That's the exact point. Yes, that's the exact point.
Okay.
Their fate has not been finalized at that point. It's still indeterminate.
Okay, so is radial cleavage the identifying hallmark of deuterostomes then, that demarcates them from protostomes?
It's a general feature, but then there were exceptions to it as well. Okay, so one of them is that this gets heavily modified in more derived forms of deuterostomes. Now, if I remember correctly, when we're doing the protostomes, I think one of the groups, I'm trying to remember, one of the groups of protostomes actually did have radial cleavage as well, the basal group. And I think the explanation for that was that actually the radial cleavage was believed, I think, to be the basal condition of the two groups. So there are a few exceptions to this. It's a general rule, but not a hard and fast fixed rule. Okay.
Thank you.
Let me just I'm kind of intrigued now because I'm just trying to remember the exact details there. Deuterostomes. I think it was the arrow worms, if I remember correctly, right? Yeah, these ketonates amongst the protostomes, I think they have radial cleavage as well amongst them. Okay.
Yeah,
but it's a general rule.
The textbook said that's why they were debating whether they were protostomes or deuterostomes.
Right, exactly. And so it wasn't. So they had a bunch of features that were, or they have a bunch of features which are confusing, and had them exactly put within. You know, it was debated which group they were in, and it wasn't until, you know, there was good sequencing data that really sort of put them in a hard and fast way inside the protostomes. Exactly. Okay, that's a good point. Okay, we're good. Jacqueline, you can type or speak, whichever suits you. I've just lowered your hand. You very low. I'm very low, as in I'm very quiet. I can't hear you.
Are you able to hear me by any chance?
Oh, no, the girl. Okay, yes, Jacqueline. Yeah, Jacqueline, you're super, super quiet.
Okay, one moment, sorry. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, that's better, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Oh, okay. Thank you, guys. Um, so I was looking over the lecture slides and I did notice that I'm not sure when you added this, a final exam revision notes. Um, would you consider that kind of like a review sheet that we can go and look over?
Yes. So that was in. So let's go finals revision notes. Okay, this is what I put in. So just take warning that of what I put at the top of it, right? These were just general notes that I sort of pulled together. This is the file that you're referring to, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So yes, this is just like bullet points of the topics that we covered. So remember though that these are some general notes that may help guide your revision, okay?
Yeah.
Just because it's not in here, you know, this is just the best of my sort of summarizing things. The PowerPoints and what was said in lectures is a sort of the ultimate guide of what will, you know, could be potentially within the exam, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is just to help you. So, you know, if there's a question and you can't find it, you know, on Deuteros Terms 2 within those dozen lines, you know, that doesn't mean I'm being unfair on you, because I'm telling you that these are just notes to help you. And I've sort of said that these are general notes to help you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
This isn't everything. This is just some guidance to help you, hopefully, okay?
So I understand.
Okay, great.
Professor, I have a question.
Oh, yes, sure, go ahead. And then I'll come to you, Eliana.
It's been, I feel like it's more about the bio lab course and about the bio practical and the grades towards that. It's not actual questions about this. I did not feel good after my bio practical. I did pass.
Okay, so who am I talking to? Sorry, I can't, because I'm sharing your screen. Your name doesn't appear on.
Edward Weinberg. I have Professor.
Okay.
Professor Aisha. Wednesdays 9:10 to 12 a.m.
Okay.
Okay. I was wondering if, like, because I heard other classes also saying how they felt about their practical last class.
So, and basically you just feel you didn't do great or something, or?
I mean, I feel from the scores I heard, I actually feel my grade was not that bad. I received a 46 out of 60.
Okay. So, you know, the main thing to remember here, and you know, we talked about it in the first lecture, and it's in the syllabus, etc. Is this is where I don't know your specific case, and I haven't compiled. You know, we're going to have a meeting at the end. You know, after all the exams, obviously, to go over grades and things like that. But this is where curving could potentially come in, and the important thing, and this is especially true with different lab sections, because obviously it's impossible when you have different, you know, you're separated into these different groups, and you have different instructors, and you know, some may be really tough, some may be not or something, and you know, I don't know, whatever the differences are. And so that's an important part where curving may come into play if, like, just say your group happens to be, you know, 10% on average lower than all the other groups or something. There would be some kind of adjustment made there, okay? So I guess the point is that if you feel like your group, because some, you know, a couple of people have sort of said, oh, my group was way unfair compared to some other group or something like that, that will be smoothed out, okay? Just so, you know, it's not unfair on a student because you happen to be in, you know, the really tough section or something like that, right? So that might come into play, but we can't, you know, we don't know until we put all the data together right at the very end, okay?
No, I completely understand.
Yeah. So maybe that could be beneficial or something.
The one thing that I know other students have told you about was in Bio 105, to even it out, they lowered some lab sections by 8% because their lab class was too high. That's the one
Okay.
thing that I fear, because overall throughout my entire lab, I was doing phenomenally, and it just came up to the practical where that was a little bit more difficult for me. So last semester, I definitely know the reports of Bio 105, Professor Holtzman, decreasing people's scores by an overall grade of 8%, which is a whole letter grade. And that is my biggest fear, that I do not want to be
Okay.
penalized by a whole letter grade.
So that is not my expectation. And I know I've said, you know, I mean, this is the first time that that I'll be overseeing the curving. Basically, I'll sort of like part, you know, in this particular course. You know, normally Dr. Baker oversees that, but he's on sabbatical this semester. So it's my thought that that's not the way that it's worked on 106. And that's what I've said previously, I believe.
I believe it is. It's just such a big worry.
Okay. It's something that I'm mindful of. Let's put it that way, okay?
Thank you, Professor.
Okay. Great. Ileana, are you waiting there? I'm gonna lower your hand.
No, I had a question because before we move past chapter 31, I have one more question for chapter 31.
Okay, sure. Where am I going here? Lectures.
Slide 51.
In which one? The deuterostomes, were you saying?
Yeah, chapter 31, slide 51.
Is it deuterostomes 1 or 2? So chordates or pre-chordates?
It's the 2, I think, because it's like the last slide.
Okay. Is it on humans?
Primates, I think. Just I don't understand which one is the word of what, like prehensile. What's prehensile?
Prehensile. So if you have a prehensile tail, it means you can curl it, right? So where is that slide? Let's see. That's further down here.
It's slide 51. 51.
I'll just look at this picture. Can you see this picture we got on here? You can see the New World monkeys. They can wrap this tail around a branch.
Right. So they use the tail as like an arm, kind of, or a
Yeah. So that means it's prehensile, and that's what it means. Okay.
Oh, okay.
That they can grab onto things with it, whereas old world monkeys cannot. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. There's a few hands up. I can't see who went up first. For the chordates, you said you have developed a circular system, but hagfish has poor circulation system. Sorry, there's a whole. I'm just trying to keep up. There's a whole bunch of comments here. Is any lab professor allowed to announce practical exam almost 2 hours the same day before the start of an exam? Victoria, I'm not sure what your issue is. You can email me about it. But if I just want to refer you to the syllabus that has the practical exam schedule announced on it, okay? I don't know the issue beyond that, so you can email me, Victoria, okay? Nathan, I'm going to lower your hand. I don't know if somebody else had their hand up, but we will have our finalized homework grades soon, since it is 15% of our grades, so we know the final grades. I'm going to work on compiling that Achieve and iClicker stuff over the weekend, okay? Ambulacrarians, yes, I believe it covers the Canada. Let me see where that's here. Okay, so it's within the let's look at the Yes, Amblyocrarians, that's these hemichordates and the echinoderms together, okay, those two groups together. So that clade, basically, that is determined or distinguished by having ciliated larvae, okay, in answer to that question. Are there terebranchs, acorn worms? Terebranchs. So they come in there. It's consumed, vascular tissue, acorn worms. So the acorn worms are a distinct group from the acorn worms. There's two different types of hemichordates, basically, in answer to that question. Okay, so acorn worms, 90 species, terebranchs, 30 species. Okay, so it's two separate groups within the hemichordates. Okay, so the difference between grazers, suspension, deposit feeders. Deposit feeders. So suspension feeders, now that it's used a little bit loosely, the way that's done in the book actually, but the suspension feeders is referring to suspended food that's in, like plankton, etc., within the water column. Deposit feeders is referring to something like these, actually, these acorn worms, where this particular type that was shown in this video is going along the seabed and feeding on this material here, this deposit down here, and processing it, right? And because within that there's organic material, either microbes and things like that, or maybe dead matter that has fallen down to the seabed. That's the deposit feeder. Grazers is referring to something that's like scraping something off the surface of rocks or something like that. So a limpet, for example, type of mollusk that is using that radula to scrape algae from the surface of the thing, or a chiton. So chiton as well. Okay, that's a different group, but they look very similar to a limpet, except for the thing. Sea urchins, yes, they're grazing as well. Okay. Just trying to see whereabouts. Where did grazers? Back to 24, 50, 18. Okay, so we had them in those. That's in those lectures where the term came up, but in lecture 18, in there was something. Can you please explain slide 11 on table, chapter 51 about Lorenz geese? Okay. Are we good with grazers and things? I think so. Yes. Okay. Chapter 51, you're saying, okay, on Lorenz's geese. Let's see where that is. Slide 3. Okay, so we're way. Conditioning. Sorry, I'm going to slide 11 first of all, on the geese. This is the duck one on slide 11. Is that the one that you mean, Pavina, or do you mean the? Yes, ducks. Okay. Okay. So this one was an experiment. So this is where they're sort of like trying to tease apart behavior and whether there is what components of it are genetically determined. Okay. So in this one, so Lorenz experiment on dabbling ducks, male ducks perform. So these ducks have a species-specific courtship dance that they go through, right? It's a very stereotypical type of thing. So the example it's giving here in in the top line is sort of showing that, you know, they go through the thing where they do a tail shake and then they do a head flick and they do a tail shake. So it's a very sort of typical thing that is typical of that species, and it is selected by females within that species. You've got to do that, you know, you've got to do the right tango basically if you're going to get the girl. But there are different species that have, you know, differences, slight differences in the way that they go through this courtship dance. So what he did here was that he did crosses between these different species that have these different courtship dances, and then looked at what happened in those male hybrids. And those hybrids display a hybrid of male components. So, you know, maybe, I'm just kind of making up a hypothetical example here, maybe this species had been then, you bred a hybrid from it, and it started off with a tail shake and it did a head flick, but instead of doing a tail shake as number 3, maybe it did, you know, a head waggle or something like that, because that's what the other species did. So it's doing a bit of both. And so that is indicating that you created a genetic hybrid, and it's then displaying a hybrid behavior, implying or indicating that there's a genetic control of that particular behavior. Okay, so females wait with only males. Yeah, so females tend to be selective of those males that display the behavior that they're looking for. Species-specific behavior. What is the hybrid female instead of the male? Don't know. I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure. Maybe he examined that, right? Maybe they go for anything. Who knows? So, but yeah, it's a good question. So, but basically, the sort of main point. Sorry, you were saying. Somebody was saying.
Professor, your screen went black. I'm not sure if I'm the only one that sees that.
Okay.
Okay, it came back.
Yeah. Okay, I'm back. Okay, sorry, I don't know what. I guess my internet's flicking in and out or something. But just to reiterate, basically what I'm saying is that the main point of this experiment of Lorentz is to show that underlying these distinctive behaviors, there is some genetic component that's controlling them, because you can create hybrid behaviors by creating genetic hybrids. Okay, that's the main point of the experiment. Okay. How is it exposed to other ducks? I don't know the detail. You know, that's in terms of whether they're exposed to other ducks, or whether where they're raised in isolation and just expressed in behavior. I'm guessing they were raised in isolation. That's what I would expect, because, you know, there had been that sort of prehistory of this, you know, this deprivation experiments where things weren't exposed to them. So, but I'm not absolutely certain, because, you know, we discussed a bit later on with birdsong that they have a learned component to it as well. But I think my guess is that these were raised in isolation. Okay, reproductive isolation. Yeah, I'm guessing they were raised in isolation. That would be my guess. Okay, that's a good question though. Okay. Anyways, conditioning, slide 3. So with this conditioning thing here, it's basically the conditioned or the conditioned reflex is what the animal is is the learned association between those, right? Yeah, conditioning means association. So it's that learned association between them. So, you know, the food. So linking, conditioned reflex, linking sound to receiving the food, okay? Some of it is hardwired. So, you know, when a dog smells food, it is hardwired to do that salivating. It is not hardwired to, you know, when you put a metronome on to start salivating, okay? it will only do so once it's become conditioned to that reflex, a conditioned reflex. So associating that sound with the food, that is the conditioning. And then you can play that in isolation. That leads to this conditioned reflex, okay? So that associated reflex, okay? Population logistics, okay. Can you explain chapter 56? Wow, that's a big question. Can you please explain? Sorry, there's a lot of things here, so I'm just trying to go through indirect fitness slides. So I'm gonna go to the population one. That's the one that I can see right now. Population logistics. So the logistic model, is that the question, Ingrid? Which yes, okay. So this, you know, this concept is explained over several chapter 53. Okay, yeah, we're on 53. Okay, so this concept of the logistic model, let's build up to it. You know, we had initially said that we had raised the question, why don't populations expand exponentially forever? Because if they did, you know, you just go up like this. You start off with 2, and then they double. There'll be 4, then they'll double, then there'll be 8, then there'll be doubling, there'll be 16, and etc. 32. It takes off exponentially, but you know, there's only so much space on Earth, and way before that happens, in Gordon. Yeah, I thought we were going in order as well, but I guess it's evolved. I'm sorry. So there's something that puts on the brakes. So, you know, because resources and stuff become limiting. So this is where this logistic model goes in. So I started off with talking about this. Let me just check on that. Okay, I'll go back a few slides as well in the way that this becomes developed. Okay, let me just go back to the slides that explain the concept. Okay, so we had these slides here. Okay, we started off with the fact that you know, the number of individuals in a population at time t is going to be the number that was at time 0, so the time before time t, plus the number of births minus the number of deaths. Okay, so you know, we've got 100 people now, and 10 people were born and 10 people died, so we still got 100 people now. That's what that's saying. We were ignoring, for simplicity, any immigration or emigration to or from the system. So we're just looking at births and deaths. Now, so B, capital B, refers to the number of people or the number of individuals that were born, and capital D relates to the number of deaths that occur within that time step from time 0 to time t. And you can express that, the number of births, in terms of the birth rate per individual per time step times the number of individuals. Okay, so for example, if there are 100 people or 100 individuals and there was 10 births over time step, you know, it's a 10% birth rate basically. For every one person, you get 0.1 births. That's what that's saying. It's that birth rate times the number of individuals. It's exactly the same for the death rate. Okay, so you can express that in terms of rates. Now, here's how the first part of that logistic model builds up. If you're expressing the change in the number of individuals within the population, it's going to be B minus D, which we've just shown here is the same as the birth rate times the number of individuals in the population at time 0. So B times NO, D minus NO. Now, basic math, you can put these into parentheses here. This is mathematically the same there. B minus D, so the birth rate minus the death rate times the number of at time 0. So you can reduce that to just like a change in a per capita growth rate or change in population rate per individual per time step, okay? So that's how the first component of the logistic model comes up. This is telling you the growth rate of the population, okay? If R is 0, it means there's no growth in the population. If R is greater than 0, it means that the population is increasing. If it's less than 0, it means it's decreasing, okay? So that's giving us the population rate, which, you know, if you only had that component and you had a positive growth rate in the population, it would do this type of thing. It would just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, the other component of the logistic model that puts on these brakes, so to curve off as you approach your carrying capacity. So where does that come in? This one, okay. This theoretical number here called K, that is the carrying capacity, the maximum number of individuals that habitat can sustain within your population, okay. It's saying that you can't go just, you know, careering and ignoring the fact that you run out of food because you're going to be dying or can't reproduce or something. Something's going to bring you to that sort of level. And that is where this component, enclosed in blue, comes in, okay? So you see here, we've got that bit that we defined before, R times N, the population, the rate of increase in the population times the number of individuals. That's making it go up. That's doing it this bit. The blue bit is then putting on the brakes and doing this. It's saying that it's K minus N divided by K. So it's what it's doing is it's saying that when you have, when your population number increases and it gets closer and closer and closer and closer to K, okay, imagine that now you're at N equals K. So N minus, K minus N is going to be 0, okay, divided by K. So dN by dt is the rate of change of the population is going to be 0 because this is coming to 0. And essentially, the closer and closer you come to that K, the smaller a fraction this becomes, okay? It starts off as a big number. So K minus, just say you only had 2 individuals in the population and K was 1,000. It would be K minus 1,000 minus 2 divided by 1,000. So it's almost 1, okay? Almost the same as if you were just increasing with the rate of R. That's what that's saying, okay? I hope that makes sense. It's a bit of a long-winded description. Okay? According to what questions people, okay. Good, okay. Where are we now? Just to make sure, this K has nothing to do with K, the K strategist. It does actually, yes. What is, you know, essentially what it's referring to is when you're talking about an R strategist, it's saying it's something that's dominated by this rapidly expanding component of this logistic model, okay? It's saying that it's something that can expand rapidly within the population. Obviously, there is some break that comes on at some point, but if you have a new niche that becomes available, an open habitat area, these guys can reproduce quickly and take over that space, okay, quickly. So that's where the R component comes in, that it's this stage of the population growth. The K strategist is referring to something that is around about here that can approach this stable part, right? Because ultimately they might be slower to take off, you know, they might actually take off way over here somewhere, but they are better competitors ultimately. And so they're dominating at that point and they outcompete these guys, which then die out. Will you have to do calculations in the tests? Will you have to do calculations? I'm not sure. You won't have to remember the equation, I'll tell you that. You might have to interpret it, okay? So for example, you know, I've sort of said, you know, here, this is showing a concept of how you might interpret something. What does the positive mean? I'll come to that in a second. So this is something that, you know, is showing an interpretation, for example, that here you have the same K value, so they're coming to the same stable population level, these two different separate populations that have different, I made these numbers up, different theoretical numbers basically. And I gave this one an R value of 0.3 and this one an R value of 0.2. So here, you know, you can see that if you have a lower R value, that's the rate at which the population is expanding, okay, before you put the brakes on. And so these increase in number more, you know, quicker, sooner in time than this that's got a lower R value, okay. Similarly, I showed this example of something that has the same R value, so 0.2 and 0.2, but different K values, okay. Can you please zoom in? Sorry, okay. There you go. Is that better? Sorry about that. Yeah, okay. And you can see my arrow, can you, or do I need to put the laser pointer on? You can see it good. Okay. So here, what I was saying, this is the just a made up populations that I did. This one, they've got the same K value, so they come to the same stable value, but this one's got a higher R value, so it increases quicker before coming up to that value. Here I've done the opposite. I've kept the R values the same, 0.2 and 0.2, but I've changed the K value. I've changed that stable level in the carrying capacity of the habitat. So this one, they expand at the same rate initially, but this one, it stabilizes at 500, okay? So this 500 is going in there. And this one is stabilizing in 1,000. Could you clarify what the R constant represents? That's the rate at which the population can grow, okay? So per capita growth rate, okay? So for each individual within the population, so at time NO before it's gone through expansion, it's the rate at which that population is growing over a certain time period, okay? What's per capita? Per individual, okay? So if your R value was 0.2 that we had, each individual on average would have 0.2 offspring, okay? That's what it's saying. Over, you know, per year or whatever your unit was for that time step, okay? Obviously, there's not just one individual in the population that wouldn't have 0.2 individual offspring, but if you had, you know, 100 individuals in your population, then it would be 100 times 0.2 would be that change, right? That change in number, that delta value, that triangle N means the change in N. Survivor offspring, or in general offspring production. Offspring production. So this is because survival is encapsulated within death rate, right? And this R value is a makeup of the birth rate minus the death rate. So it's wrapped into one, okay, to get that expansion rate. If your death rate becomes bigger than your birth rate, this R will be negative, and vice versa. Okay? How are we doing then? Any more questions on that particular topic? Nope. Good. Okay. Okay. Where are we now? No, thank you. Good. Any other topics that people want to visit? Or do people want their dinner? I'm not sure. Okay. I think. Did you have a question, Parvina? Communities. Can you please? Okay, now I'm getting two different things. Okay, can you please also explain direct and indirect fitness in slides 4? Okay, so I'm going to go to that, the indirect fitness, which slides 46 of which of chapter 51? Okay, I'll go there first, and then I'll go. Ingrid had a question about communities. Okay. Ecology. Okay, these are all. Okay, so we go to this chapter 51, and it was slide 46. Okay, what's the... Oh, this I'm in. When you said chapter 51, I think you've got the incorrect. This that is the behavior one. Ecology, chapter 55. Okay, Pavina, I'm not sure if you mean chapter 51, so I'll go, so ecology, chapter 55, Ingrid. Question chapter 55. Is there a particular slide you're talking about, Ingrid, in chapter 55 in communities? Yes. Which one is it?
Professor,
Yes.
for the direct fitness and the indirect, I have it on chapter 51, the one about kin selection and inclusive fitness.
Okay, so at the moment I've got chapter 55 open, and
okay.
I'm Ingrid, ecology, chapter 55, species interaction, trophic cascades. Give me a slide number, Ingrid. Trophic cascades, that came towards the end, I seem to remember. I do not have the slide number, sorry. Okay. Trying to see where that came up, finding documents. I need to know exactly which bits you're talking about. Yellowstone. So I'm going to talk about this cascade component, okay? Let's go here, okay? It was near. Okay, Ingrid, I hope I'm on the right component here. So biotic factors controlling community membership, species interactions, and trophic cascades, okay? So one of them is a direct interaction where species A is directly interacting with another, or you could have an indirect. And the example that we talked about, and this is where you're having sort of a cascading effect. Okay, species A knocking onto species B, which is affecting species C. And so trophic cascade, the rate of consumption of one trophic level results in the change in a species abundance or composition at a low trophic level. So that's the key component there, okay? And the example that was talked about here was, so we first of all talked about wolves and how they affected elk numbers in Yellowstone National Park. And then in the slides that come after this, we talked about how actually these elk they feed upon different vegetation, which is also what is meant by trophic, a feeding interaction. So trophic means feeding, okay? A feeding interaction. So wolves feeding upon elk, okay? So here what was happening, these elk numbers are changing over time due to changes in wolf numbers, okay? Because initially there were lots of wolves before, you know, we hunted them all out. And at that time they were feeding upon elk. Now, elk numbers weren't recorded prior to the 1920s, but once wolves were eliminated, so there's no natural predator anymore, but people were still hunting on them, wolves. That's indicated by that rifle, right? So that kept elk numbers in some kind of a check. Then hunting was banned and the elk numbers went way up. And then they reintroduced wolves in 95, and then elk numbers went down. So it's, it makes sense. You're killing them, there's less of them. You're not killing them, they increase in number, okay? Now, this is the trophic cascade part. So the wolves were having a trophic interaction and effect on the elk population numbers, which then have a cascading effect through all of this on vegetation abundance, particularly willow trees, and I think there are some other trees that they affected as well, which then has an effect on beavers because elk eat these willow trees, and so when there's lots of elk, there's less willow trees, and beavers eat willows, so when there's no willows, there's less beavers, okay? And vice versa. So you're having a cascading effect, like a waterfall type effect. Wolves are affecting elk numbers, which are affecting vegetation abundance. Sorry, that's my dog whining. And which is then affecting beaver numbers. That's the cascading effect, okay? That we're referring to. Okay, does that make sense, Ingrid? Okay, I have to leave the review session. Okay, no problems, Jacqueline. If you have any other questions, Jacqueline, just drop me an email, etc. Okay, now chapter 51, PowerPoint slides, slide 52, inclusive fitness. Okay, we can go there. Is it chapter 51? See, that's the behavior one. Is that chapter 51, slide 52? Oh, I've got my class slides, so the slide numbers might be slightly different if I put like discussion points or something in. 52. Oh, kin selection. Okay, so we're talking about the kin selection. Trophic geek means food. Okay, green means food. Okay. Okay, so your question was on this inclusive fitness. Okay, so this is there's more discussion on this actually in the book and talking about insects and things like this. But this aspect of kin selection. So let's go here. Altruism is the act of benefiting another individual at a cost to the performer. So, and when I say cost, or when it says cost, it really refers to a fitness cost. That if I'm doing something like providing lots of food to some other individual, well, that's at a cost to me because I could be eating that food and becoming stronger and having more offspring and etc. Becoming more fit and genetically fit by passing more genes on to the next generation. Instead, I'm giving that food away, right? So why might animals engage? My dog is whining away. So why might animals engage in this altruistic act that seemingly is counterintuitive because it should lower your fitness? That's where this kin selection theory comes in, okay? Because the hypothesis or theory here is that you're maximizing your inclusive fitness, not just your own personal fitness, okay? So we'll talk about what that means. Depending upon circumstances, may select for behaviors that are costly to individual because the inclusive fitness gains are maximized. That's shown in this slide here, okay? So the concept here is that evolution is acting upon, at the gene level, okay? That if there are certain genes that are being passed on from generation to generation, are being selected for as opposed to eliminated from the population, evolutionary wise, that's what's going to happen to those genes, right? So here, this is where this concept of inclusive fitness occurs. So if I'm me, which I am, then if I reproduce, I have 100% of my genetic material. The most that I can pass on to the next generation in a single individual would be for me to have children, okay? Because 50% of the genes in that individual are going to be my genes, okay? And so, you know, that's where I would invest my energy. That makes sense. That's why, you know, you would want to look after your offspring, right? However, genetically, you know, my sister is 50% genetically similar to me because, you know, we have the same mother and father, right? So if my sister has a child, my nephew and niece are going to be actually 25% genetically similar to me. So in an evolutionary concept or aspect, my genes can also, these same genes that are in me, 25% of them could be passed on in my nephew and niece, okay? And that goes true for, you know, it's true for more distant relatives as well. So in an evolutionary sense, you know, 3 of my nieces and nephews are worth more genetically than 1 of my children, okay? Because they contain more genes of me in them. And so what this theory is doing is basically just sort of saying, well, you know, I should be just, I theoretically could distribute my altruistic behaviors that are costly to me, disperse them to these different individuals based upon how genetically related they are to me. So if they're genetically related individuals to me, it can make evolutionary sense. There can be evolutionary pressure upon selecting my behavior that would disperse my efforts in these directions that would be passing on genes through different trajectories, basically. Okay? That is the sort of theory, essentially, of kin selection. Genetically, these individuals are rated to me. If there was an individual that was 0 related to me, then it wouldn't make altruistic sense to invest. One new chat message. Okay. It's still confusing me. How does % of genes factor in fitness? It's fitness by definition, okay? So the passing on of your genes to the next generation is by definition fitness. That was what genetic or evolutionary fitness means, okay? I think actually the strict definition goes beyond the next generation. It's beyond that, but that's what a definition of fitness is, basically. Okay, does that make sense, Nathan? If you just if you Google, and we could do it now, if you Google sort of you know, genetic fitness definition of it, you'll see. Why isn't 100% of you both get 50-50 from mom and dad? Sibling. Because I only get 50%, if I'm understanding that that term correctly. I think one of the questions was, why is my sibling only 50% genetically similar to me? It's because 50% of my genes come from my mother, and so there's a 50-50 chance of which way this is going, right, on average. So 50% might come to me, but the same 50% is not necessarily going to my siblings, okay? And if that's what your question is, okay, does that, I hope that makes sense. Oh, it's taken in about your fitness and not your fitness. Okay, your genes that are going into the next generation is what your fitness is, basically. Okay, think of it in those terms. Okay, when it refers to your fitness, it means how many of these. If I have 0% of these genes in me and 0 of them are passed on to my next generation, my fitness is 0. okay? It's how I can pass on these same genes through all of these different parts of my family tree, okay, that end up ultimately in future generations in general, okay? So you should care for your siblings, same as your kids. I guess so. Okay. Are there any other? Does that answer all the slides on this? Okay. Thanks for the review session, Professor. I have to go. Okay, good. Folks have to go, which I totally understand. And this is, you know, we don't have to go on forever. Let's see if I can end this slide thing. Where are we going next? I can answer more questions if people want, or you can email me questions if you have an issue related to that, okay? You know, something that if you run out of time. Ileana, I'll lower your hand. I'm sorry, Professor, but I need to go. Great. If you need to go, that's totally fine. You know, don't feel like you have to stay here or anything like that, okay? Friday night, most people have got better things to do, right? So, okay.
Professor, I have a question.
Okay, and then I see Nathan's got his hand up as well. So,
Okay.
so who's speaking first of all? Go ahead, the first person.
I don't know. Should I ask?
Yes.
So for lecture 20, chapter 51, slide 9.
Okay.
What's deprivation experiment?
Prevention experiment. Oh, deprivation experiment.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my
This one with the spider webs.
Right, so that's basically saying that the spider is genetically is born with the knowledge to make a certain spider because of the species.
Right, and so the deprivation part of this is the fact what the deprivation is referring to, meaning depriving. Okay, these spiders were deprived of being brought up with other spiders of the same species. That's what the deprivation is referring to. They were deprived of growing up with other individuals of the same species. They were grown up in isolation. Okay, so in other words, what it's showing is that they can't have learned how to build these species-specific webs from other individuals because they were deprived of learning. You know, if there was any learning mechanism that may theoretically exist, they were deprived of that, and yet they still built those species-specific nests, implying or indicating that, you know, that must be a genetic hardwired behavior because they've never had the opportunity to learn it from other individuals.
So that's the opposite of the bird songs, right?
Well, the bird songs is an interesting one, so it gets more complex there. That's actually a combination of all sorts of things, right? So there's a genetic component to it and a learning component to it and a you know, a time component that's hormonal dependent as well, right? So where did that come up? That came up further down here. Yeah, so here, is this the experiment you're talking about?
Right.
With the bird? Yeah, so there is a genetic component in that it's species specific, but they also have to learn it at the same time as well. So isolated, hand-reared birds. So, you know, even if they've not heard another bird before, they'll still try and sing, okay? But in order to sing correctly, there's a learned component in addition to that, okay, where they learn how to, you know, they've heard this sound and then they learn how to do it later on. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
A bit like our accents in a way, right? So you know, if you're brought up in a certain area or something, I mean, we all kind of make noises and speak, but I guess this is a little bit like that we learn to modify our speech by this by listening and learning. And if you know, if you speak to a deaf person who's not able to do that, they can still speak in many cases, but they don't, you know, they don't talk quite like us because they're not able to modify that sound, you know, sort of process it and see if it sounds similar to the way that you spoke to me and things like that, right?
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Have to go. Okay. Nathan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So going back to the logistic growth models you were looking at before, is there a way to like visually tell whether certain life history traits are density dependent based on the population number charts?
Well, there's always going to be density dependence in some way, right? So it's not as if an archive strategist has no density dependence. They absolutely do. So, you know, it's a slightly misleading term in that sense. So everything has got density dependence in some form or manner. In terms of being able to tell whether there is density dependence, now that's actually where, I don't know, is this, let me know if this is kind of partly answering the question that you just asked. So here is a way that you can sort of explore density dependence. In this experiment, this sort of monitoring survey that was done on snow goose that showed their population numbers going up over time, but there was a whole host of other things that were measured, such as their clutch size, which as population numbers went up, clutch size went down. And clutch size meaning how many, if you go to a nest and look how many eggs are in there that the females managed to lay, it goes down from, you know, an average 4.7 or something when you have a low density down to only 4 eggs when you have a high density. So that's a measure of that is something that's directly affecting the reproductive rate of the population. There were other things they mentioned and looked at, so also the chick weight. So not only are you producing less eggs, but those chicks that hatch from them weigh less. And then when you look at their survival, it goes down as well, okay? So you're getting less eggs, the chicks are in worse condition, and they survive less well. As a result of this increase in population number, that's probably related to, you know, you can imagine there's probably food limitation that's coming in at this point in time. There might be other factors as well, such as you know, interaction between individuals, you know, one female or male from a nest going and killing chicks next door, or they're in a denser, they're living closer together, so maybe diseases spread easily and things like that. So these are all factors that are affecting that logistic growth model, right? Which I think, yeah, in this slide here, I've sort of emphasized that point, that they're effectively bringing in this density dependent factor that brings you to your carrying capacity in the habitat. Okay, that is putting on the brakes basically as population numbers go up. Reproductive or the rate of change in the population, rate of change of the number with time is being modified and reduced as you get a denser population. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so basically look at the population number chart first and then look at the other traits and see how they correspond.
Right, yeah, you can see in terms of, I think the original question was how can you see density dependent effects, or which species have density dependent effects? This is an example. So there are these would be referred to as, you know, proxies of fitness, basically, that are affecting that. So all individuals, you know, all populations are going to be affected by this in some form or manner. You know, even bacteria and things like that. I think there was, where was it? There was a experiment with using protists or something, wherever that may be, you know, showing that they actually, you know, come to a stable level as well. That was in the species interactions slide. But yeah, they all are subject eventually to this carrying capacity, no matter what kind of organism you are, unless you live in infinite space with infinite resources.
Right. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. Do you have office hours next week?
I can do on, I'm normally on Tuesday, aren't I? It would be, so it'd be, I'm just trying to pull out my calendar right now, but I can't get my phone to turn on. So, you know, I should be good for that. I don't think, you know, I keep that time slot available. This week was an exception, this Thursday. I had a special thing going on, but look at my schedule for Tuesday. And that'll be the 18th, right? Yeah, no, that's, you know, just regular office hours. I'm available through that Zoom link, okay? So, you know, you have to wait if somebody else is already in there, etc. If that time doesn't suit you, you can email me and we can arrange a special time, okay?
Great, thank you so much. Have a nice weekend.
Ileana, am I going to have office hours this coming Tuesday? Yes, we just said that. Yes, I have questions, but I have another class. Yes, so we can do office hours at that time, or we can arrange a special time if needed, okay? Great. Okay. Are we good for now, or any? Good, thanks very much. You too. Okay. Okay, I'll stop sharing that screen and make the assumption. Okay. I will put the slide, that original, you know, the first slides that I had on just describing the exam, I'll put that on Blackboard for you guys, okay? And unless I have any other questions in the next 5 seconds, then I will leave you to it, okay? So thanks very much, and office hours, or you can email me if you have further issues, okay? Bye.